word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
We've got a bit of ground to cover this morning, so I'm just going to get right into it. Like I mentioned before, the purpose of this series, there are a couple. If you saw the video I actually put out earlier to test our new Wi-Fi extender, which, by the way, I think is working good. Is it working good? All right, cool. I use that as a way to sort of explain what the purpose of this series is. Come Back, It's Not What You Think targets two main groups of people. All of us here and all of us there. So I think I got them all. But for the people outside of these walls who either walked away from faith or walked away from God or walked away from the church, those of us inside the walls can sometimes view them in a certain way that may or may not be true because they view the church or God or faith in a way that may or may not be real. So half of the majority of the people who are outside of these walls, this series is for them. So whether you're watching it online, which by the way, we get a lot of people that watch online. We have 55, 60 people in this room right now. We've had over half of our messages that we've been able to live stream in poor quality have had 800, 900, 1,000 viewers. So whether they're watching the whole sermon or not, that's 1,000 people who have listened to some of a message in this church that would never have before. So think of that reach. So this message, while yes, it's for you, and I'll get to why it's for you in a second, it's for you out there who are watching this, who aren't in here, because you haven't been able to embrace atheism. Here's the thing. We have been told that there's a crisis of faith in this country, there's a crisis of Christianity, that more and more people are turning to atheism. That actually isn't true. More and more people are becoming what they call nuns, and not convent nuns. They're becoming nuns, as in they're just not affiliated with any church or any faith or any religion. That is a far cry from embracing atheism. There's a subtle distinction there, but it's an important one to know. That when they've walked away from faith, they aren't doing it because they want to be atheists. It's just that the church or Christians or faith or any of that stuff has become unappealing to them for various reasons. I do not have the time to go into why, all the whys, but just know that it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they just don't want to get up in the morning on Sunday. It's not any of that. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who are just doing it because they just would rather just I don't need that in my life. But the reality is they aren't turning to atheism. However, when you walk away from something, you walk towards something else. So I will talk about atheism a little bit in this message specifically, because the reality is that whether they know it or not, while they may not be ready to embrace atheism full on, they've turned away. When you turn away from faith, when you turn away from God, when you turn away from the church and all of that stuff, you are turning towards something else, whether you know it or not. And that thing is atheism. Now, if you're watching this online and if you've walked away, they may not be ready to embrace atheism, because there are a lot of assumptions. There are 6 good assumptions that you have to be an atheist. I'm not going to cover them all. I will cover a few of them later in this message. Because you think we've got some weird beliefs. The opposite is not, I won't call it weird, but I will say you have to make some very strong assumptions to not believe. Okay, so that is one group. One group are those who have walked away, and the reason why this series is for them is because they may have walked away from a God that does not exist. They may have walked away from a Jesus that did not institute the church. And they just may have walked away from a childish faith rather than a grown-up one. So that's why it's for them. Why it's for you is because I will bet my next paycheck that every person in this, by the way, full disclosure, Methodists, we don't bet, we don't gamble, but I would bet my whole next paycheck that everybody in this room knows somebody who's walked away from faith or walked away from the church or walked away from God. I would bet my next one that you probably like them still. It's for you because whether it's your kids or your grandkids or a friend or a coworker or somebody you care about deeply, somebody in your life has done this, and you may or may not know a good way to actually talk about this with them. You don't want to, maybe you do. I was going to say, you don't want to beat them over the head with your Bible. Maybe you do. I would not recommend it. But maybe that's the only thing you know. Well, the Bible says this, or God says this. Well, that's not going to work with them because they don't care about the Bible. That's not their starting point. I'm not saying it's a bad starting point for you, but if you're going to engage in the conversation, let's put it this way. Think about any other situation where you have a disagreement. Are you going to start by telling them you're wrong because my position says this? I mean, you see this here? This, for those of you who don't know, is a symbol of despair. Okay, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, lifelong Browns fan. I can't help it. It is in my blood. I love them no matter how bad they are. Now, I have a great many Steeler fan friends. My son, thanks to my wife, is probably a burgeoning Steeler fan. So whatever, he'll be the smart one in the family. I don't know. But I cannot start to tell him anything about why I think he's misguided in his thing by starting with this. Because he doesn't care about this. Okay? We cannot start with non-Christians and tell them why they need something with the Bible, because they do not care. That's not a value judgment, it's a reality. They just don't care. They just don't care. So you can't start there. But you care about them. You care about them, so you want to talk. Here's the thing. We in the church have to realize that when people aren't here for various reasons, that their reasons are meaningful to them. Most people are not coming to church. That's not how I want to say it. People who aren't here aren't doing so, again, like I said, just because they're lazy or they'd rather be doing something else. Yeah, that plays into it. That makes it easier. I'd rather be getting ready for the game. But I find something to be more important. Angela hates football. Have I mentioned that once or twice? She hates football. But they're not here. Their reasons for not being here are meaningful to them. So whether we think they're valid reasons or not, it means something to them. So you can't just dismiss them. And so this series is for you because hopefully it will give you an insight into what they're thinking. Not all of them, it's a generalization, but into what many people are thinking when they walk away from this stuff. Give you that insight, and then hopefully it will then empower you to have meaningful conversations around this. Meaningful conversations. I know we would all love our kids and grandkids and our friends and everybody to be in this building doing this with us right now. The reality is most of them won't. But if you can have a meaningful conversation with them about their faith or their lack of faith or why they've done what they've done and help them understand it, we go a huge step further with bringing them closer to Jesus. And that is the goal, people. That is the goal. It's not getting them here in this building. It's bringing them closer to Jesus. A byproduct of that is that sometimes they come to this building. Okay, so that's what this series, hopefully, is about and will do for you. If it hasn't been clear, I'll just come right out and say now that connecting with people, connecting with our kids, our grandkids, our friends, connecting with them is more important than making sure they toe the party line. Like, so connecting with them and helping them navigate faith is more important than being sure that they're walking the party line in terms of what to believe. That they believe is more important in what they believe. Now that is a bold statement, and I just heard somebody gasp. Yeah, but if they don't believe, you know what? I'm not worried about that right here, right now. They don't believe anything, or they don't believe something, or they're confused about where they are, or maybe they don't care. Again, we're not at the doctrine portion of this. We won't get there for a long, long, long time. Right now, we're worried about why don't you believe? So connecting with them is much, 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 much more important than making sure that they're Christian, making sure that they toe the Christian line, making sure they toe the Methodist line, making sure they toe the Woodland Park United Methodist line. much, much more important. Since you can't use the Bible as your starting point, Paul actually does, he does what I'm saying here in this passage. This passage is going to sort of be the underpinning for this whole series. Well, we may read different portions of it because actually the passage is much longer. The section of it is much longer. It's like 16 to 31 is the whole section. And we only read a part of that. Paul, in this story, doesn't go to them and say, you guys are all wrong. I've got the good news. I've got the real thing. You guys are all wrong. No. He goes out to them. He observes them for a while to try and figure out what's going on. And he realizes, man, these people are really religious. You can't be unreligious without having like all these different gods. And then he latches on to something they know, the unknown God, because back in that time, in that place, they wanted to make sure they had their bases covered. So they're like, we acknowledge all of these and the ones we don't too. We acknowledge those, they're whatever. And he's like, yeah, I know that one. So he starts with them, not by telling them how wrong they are, or by telling them he's got the truth. He says, hey, you guys are really religious folks. That's awesome. He goes and does something. He connects with them at a point with something they know. He's like, you guys are really religious. Oh, and I see you're doing this thing over here. You've got this unknown God. Well, let me tell you about that unknown God. He's not antagonistic. He connected with them first. And then he goes on to say, and by the way, I think I know this thing that could be helpful to you. That, my friends, I hope is going to be what this series does for you. It allows you to connect. And I'm going to make an assumption here, and it's probably true. In my experience, it's been true. And that is, I've been talking about out there and in here, like everybody sitting in here is like on board with the same kind of belief. That's not true. We're all in different parts of the spectrum, and I bet there's somebody in here, sitting in here, who's actually like, yeah, I identify with them probably more. That's okay. That's awesome. By the way, if that's you, you don't have to raise your hand. But I see you. I appreciate you. I'm very glad that you're here. Okay, so I said I was going to talk a little bit about atheism, not because this is a diatribe against atheism. This isn't a diatribe against atheism. This isn't even an argument for belief. I'm not doing that in this message. I may or may not do that in this series. This is not a series that I can do a series on arguing for belief. In fact, that's pretty much every message does that. This is to help you understand what it really means to be an atheist. Because we just assume that atheism is just a non-belief in God. That is not true. Atheism is just every bit as complex as any religious structure. It is a belief system. Atheism is a belief system. It's easy to say, I'm an atheist because I just don't believe. No. You don't not believe in something. You always believe in something. It is our nature to believe and try to figure out. You just may not believe in God. So if you're an atheist or you find yourself turning away from faith, remember, you're turning towards something else. The opposite of faith and God and church is none of that. Atheism is what we call it. But here are a couple things. And I'm sure, and I speak from experience here. By the way, I mentioned this last week, and I mentioned it a couple other times. I am talking from a position of knowledge. I know this because I've been this. And also, if you ever want to read a great writer who has been this and became basically the mouthpiece for Christianity in the modern world, C.S. Lewis was an atheist. C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis was an atheist. He became a Christian, and if you want to understand what it means to be that, read anything that he wrote that wasn't Chronicles of Narnia. I just read Mere Christianity this week by him, and It's such an amazing. I hate this microphone so much. It will change your life. But okay, so back to atheism. Because if you're turning away from faith, you're turning toward atheism. Here are probably why there are some reasons why you won't be able to, and why most people can't fully grasp onto actually being an atheist. Because there are a couple of things you have to believe to be an atheist. They're ingrained in atheistic thought. And one of them is the thing called the illusion of mind. The illusion of mind is basically this. If there is no God out there, then there is no you in here. Atheism is a humanistic belief, and humanistic just means they focus on humans. Like humans are the highest order, and they are the beginning and end of everything. So nothing happens without humanity. Okay, but we are all run by biology and chemistry and physics. And this is not a diatribe against science. I agree with all that. I believe all of that. But atheism assumes that we are only controlled by biology and chemistry and physics. And so without getting really complex into this, if you want a better discussion about this, read The Language of God by Francis S. Collins. He is the head of the Human Genome Project, and he is a Christian. And reading that book will blow your mind about how you can reconcile these two things. But atheists believe that we're all governed by those things, and therefore we don't really have, there's nothing bigger than that. So, how can I put this? We believe in, the idea of the mind, okay, is intangible. It's like out there. It's something we accept as real. We don't know how to explain it, but the fact that I can talk about this, the fact that I can think about myself and not just instinct, that is the mind, okay? That is this larger idea called the mind. In atheism, there is none of that, because you're only biology and chemistry and physics. You are governed by these concrete laws that never change, and so you don't really have a choice. You can't step outside of this bigger picture. So it's a hard, this is actually one of the things that stops people from embracing atheism full on. Because logically, it doesn't make any sense to be able to speak from a position of, speak about these intangible things if it's just biology and chemistry and physics. If there's nothing intangible, then how can we even think about it? So there's this illusion of mind, but they say there's no God, so there is no you. Which leads into the next one, there is no free will. Now almost not even every Christian denomination believes in free will. They'll say so, but predestination really kind of excludes the idea of free will. Atheism, because you're just biology, chemistry, and physics, there is no free will. You are everything. In atheism, it's called determinism. Everything is determined. It's been predetermined. You can't do anything because everything is just a logical outflow of the previous thing. And in the end is determined because you can't change anything. You are just a collection of cells. You are just a collection of biology. You are governed by the laws of physics and chemistry. So everything, you have no choice. Now, this really falls apart again when a guy like an atheist, a very popular atheist, he's passed away now, but Christopher Hitchens, he would make this argument against free will, that there is no free will, it's determinism, but he never stopped to apply that to himself, because he was freely thinking. He's like, there is no mind and there is no free will, but I'm free to speak my mind. Is basically, like, it makes no sense. So, but there's no mind, there's no free will, and then in atheism there is no value. There's only ascribed value. Without God, there is no value. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this one because that is actually a whole message about justice and value in this series, which actually Pastor Vicky will be preaching on the 23rd. We're flipping pulpits, and she'll be here to preach that one, which is good because I get a little hyped up when I start talking about that issue. So those are just three. There are others. But those are just three things that you have to embrace to be a full-blown atheist. To say there is no God is to accept those things. there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So my struggle, though, is this. I'm not an atheist anymore. But even now, I sometimes struggle with the questions of, is there a God? But more importantly, why should I care? And I think that is where a lot of people have walked away from faith. It's not that they necessarily believe there is no God, but they have to ask the question because of what they see in the world or their experience. Like, why would a God, blah, blah, blah. Why would a good God allow these things to happen? That'll, again, be talked about in the injustice message. But the question of, is there a God? Is there a God in all of this? And if there is, why should I care? If that God seems uncaring, why should I care? A brief explanation. I mean, I hit agnosticism, which is belief that there's something, but not necessarily, you can't define it. I believe in something. You'll hear that called a higher power a lot by some groups. But my descent into atheism / really strong agnosticism, if that's what you want to call it, I blamed that church last week for making me, get to a point where I was like, if this is what Christianity must be like, then there must be no God. Which, by the way, brings along with it a whole set of assumptions we do not have time to dismantle right now, because that's a big logical leap to say, I'm mad at something, so it must not be real. There's a disconnect there. In fact, I just had a conversation this week with a member of this church who was struggling with their faith. And the person said, I'm struggling with my faith, I'm just not sure. And I go, tell me about that. And the person begins giving me all this anger language. And I go, I have great news for you. You're not having a crisis of faith, you're having a crisis of relationship. Like, Angela and I can be mad at each other, but I mean, she's there still. That's not a reason, that you're not worried about belief, you're worried about your relationship. And that's a whole different thing, we can talk about that. But mine, I blamed it on that church, but it actually started much, much earlier than that. It started with the death of my dad. The death of my dad when I was 10. Now, I never went to church as a kid, so I don't even know why I did this, but there was always this assumption of God, of a good God, a God who loved you. I don't know where that came from, because it literally was never taught in my house. It was actively not taught in my house, actually. So why I would have that, I don't know. But when my dad died when I was 10, immediately I got angry at God. Got angry at the idea that God would take my dad away from me. And that's where it started. And it just all kind of held on. Even after I went to church, I realized that a lot of my faith was rooted in trying to get rid of this anger, this pain that I had experienced, and it didn't work. But that's where it all started. And so I was walking away from something that I had built up in my head, or that I had heard from other places. Andy Stanley calls this the somebody told me so God. I walked away from a God that somebody told me about. Not necessarily one that exists, but somebody told me these things. Somebody told me God was good at some point. They must have. I don't just come up with that on my own. Somebody must have told me that God doesn't let bad things happen to good people, or to people. Let's put it that way. I don't know how good I was as a 10-year-old. My mom would probably argue contrary to that. She'd probably be right. Why does God let bad things happen? Full stop. Somebody told me. Somebody told me that God doesn't let that happen. So when it did happen, I start walking away. Blamed it on the church. They just gave me an excuse to do something I'd already been looking to do probably for a long time. I said before, I think you probably all either are struggling with something like this from time to time, or you know somebody who is. Whether it's a family member. Again, I will a lot of times I will talk about my relationship with my mom during messages and things like that, because this is a real life example of a relationship that wasn't that great, but that had a lot of different layers, and in the end, didn't work out. Like, I want to be able to stand up here every time and give you this message of hope that says, hey, every time you do this, it's going to work. reality is that's not true. It has worked. I explained last week how a situation did work. But in the case of like this with my mom, and even my sisters, to be honest with you, like my sisters call themselves Christians, my mom didn't, but life doesn't bear that out. And my one sister, who may or may not be watching this, she struggles a lot with this concept of bad things happening. Like, is there a God? Why should I care? Because my life is so hard. Like my life is difficult. So again, this message is for both those groups of people. But I know that we are all struggling with this in some way, whether personally or because we know somebody. Like I said before, I bet there's somebody in this room. There's somebody in this room who really, whether you want to admit it or not, asks the question probably weekly, why should I even care about this anymore? Why should I even care about this anymore? The passage we use with Paul, talking about the unknown God this week, that is a good passage that for the series. But for this message, and this passage has been gnawing at me for over a week now. And it's Proverbs 14:12. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it basically says, before every person lies a road that they think is right, but in the end leads to death and destruction. Now, I didn't use this. I didn't want to use that passage today because I didn't want to say death and destruction, because I thought, man, that's really aggressive language. I look at over 30 translations. Every single one of them uses death as the end point of going down the wrong road. So the Hebrew was very clear about the intent of what happens when you go down the wrong road. But listen to that first part again. Before every person lies a road they think is right. If you're struggling, or if you know somebody who's struggling, remember they're not doing that because they think that let's put it this way, they're not behaving in that way out of malice or out of laziness or out of contempt for the church, or even though those might be the presenting issues. I don't like church because it's full of hypocrites. That might be the presenting issue. The reality is they think they're right about something. No evil happens just for the sake of being evil. Every evil in this world happens because somebody thinks they're doing some kind of good, even if that good is based on a warped morality or self-centeredness. I could use the most extreme example of evil that we think of in Hitler. No, we would never argue that Hitler did a good thing, ever. But if you stop and remove yourself emotionally from it for 1 second and think about his mentality, as evil as it was, as evil as he was, as evil as his actions were, he didn't do it for the sake of being evil. In his own warped mind, he thought he was doing something that was for the good of himself or for a certain group of people or whatever. So I will stand by my assertion that no evil happens in this world that's not based on somebody's idea of good. And that's where the idea of value down the road, when we talk about there is no value, and that's where that comes in. But my point is this. And we all are doing something we think is right. So when you want to get into an argument about somebody about their belief, or their faith, you want to tell them they're wrong, or that they should do this, or Jesus is the only way, or any of that, remember, they're not where they are because they're bad, or because they don't want to be doing something better. It's because whatever decision they've made, or whatever confusion they're feeling, has come out of some sense of something good for them. It may be, like I said, it might be a self-centered good, or it might be a warped sense of morality. We can have that. But when you talk to folks, you have to connect with them on a personal level that says, I know that what you think you're doing is good. I think what I'm doing is good. Can I tell you about my goodness? Or the thing that I think is good? Let me rephrase that. Not my goodness. Can I tell you about the thing that I think is good? Without telling you the thing that you have is bad. Because again, it shuts people off. I'm not saying that it isn't bad. Just saying that is not the way to start this. So, I wish I could give you some kind of biblical truth for this message to latch onto, but the purpose of this message was to be a springboard for the next 3, for the rest of this series. I wanted to help you understand certain things about the atheist position, because again, when you turn away from something, you're turning towards something else, whether you embrace it or not. You have to know what people are walking toward, what you yourself may be walking toward when you turn away. And I only said that so you understand the picture. But the bigger part of it is that I wanted to clear away this idea that walking away and not being here and all of that is some kind of bad thing or an evil thing, or that people are in the wrong when they do that. Yes, I would love to see people here, and yes, I believe that Jesus is the way to make this world better. I believe that Jesus, you want to say Jesus the way, the truth, and the life? Sure. Well, we can say that. I believe that. But when I start with other people, I start talking about other people's beliefs, or their non-belief, from a position of arrogance, or a position of I'm right and you're wrong, or a position of you're so confused and misguided, that makes me say things or act in a way that just isn't good. So this message was sort of to just clear some of that away, and also bring a cloud down. Actually, some people say the purpose of a message should be to bring clarity to the word. That is not my purpose today. My purpose is to actually drop a cloud on this congregation, because I don't want any of us sitting here for the next month thinking we've got this crap figured out. Because we may be better at it than others, or we may have a better understanding about our faith and all that, and it may be very concrete to us. But you have to enter into the mind of somebody who doesn't have that in order to talk with them about this. You have to understand it. You have to understand it. And so if you're feeling like a little like, what is going on here? Good. That's where they are. That's where they are. What is going on here? So I want you to keep an open mind the rest of the series. I want you to keep an open mind. Now, honestly, I want you to keep an open mind the whole time I'm at this church, because you're going to need it. But I want you to keep an open mind for the rest of this series, because I'm going to say some things that are going to make you uncomfortable. I'm going to say some ideas that are going to make you uncomfortable. I promise you that. That is a promise. Can I say it again? I promise you that this series is going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. And that's especially true the firmer you hold your grip on ideas that you just cannot let go of. I'm not asking you to let go of ideas, by the way. I'm not asking you to get rid of your faith or get rid of your ideas, or to not even believe what you were told. But I want you to be able to test the ideas that you were told. Test them and see where they've taken you. Because honestly, that's what I would say to a non-believer, or somebody who's not here. Say, how's that worked out for you? You know, how's non-belief worked out for you? Where has it taken you? Where have you gone since you've walked away from the church? Where have you gone? Well, I ask you the same question in a little bit different way. Since you're here and you keep coming here, where is that taking you? What is that belief about that thing doing for you? In a more snarky way, how do you like them apples? They taste good? They working out for you? Because not everything we believe is good. Not everything we believe in this room is good. Just because we slap a Christian label on it does not make it good. So I'm going to crack some assumptions. You don't have to believe them, but know you're going to be uncomfortable. Keep an open mind, though, and test it. Don't just disregard it because you don't like it. Test it. You may decide, I'm not believing that thing. That's fine. But at least you'll know why. At least you'll know why you believe what you believe, and not just because somebody told you so. Imagine if the God you walked away from didn't exist. I would ask that. I would say that. I say that to my cousin. My cousin's an atheist. Although, again, he's angry at God. So I'm like, how can you be angry at something that doesn't exist, man? But I tell him, I would say to him, and I have said to him, imagine if that God did exist. Because what the God you're telling me about right now, I don't believe in that God either. So imagine Imagine if that God didn't exist. Imagine if the Bible's told me so Jesus that you all grew up with wasn't the one that launched a church. Now I'm saying these things because these are the next couple messages. Actually, those two ideas are the next message. Imagine this one. If you realize that walking away from God and the church didn't mean walking away from faith. Imagine if walking away from church and from God didn't mean walking away from faith. Here's the good news. This series is going to help you or someone you deeply care about. It's going to help you. It's going to help you or someone you care about be invited. It's going to invite them back to the faith of your childhood, the faith of their childhood, but you're not inviting them back to a childish faith. You're going to be inviting them back to a grown-up one. A grown-up faith. Now, some of us in this room still have a childish faith. And that's okay for kids. It's okay for the kids down in Faith Explorers to have a childish faith. It's expected. But I will unapologetically say, nobody in this room should have a childish faith. Nobody should. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I am proof of the truth of this series. I'm proof of the truth of this series. If it weren't for somebody doing for me the things I'm telling you, I wouldn't be standing here. I would not be standing here. So as we move throughout the rest of this series, know the things I'm telling you are absolutely true because I have experienced them to be true. Now that isn't always the litmus test because I know it to be true. But the reality is that when I was a teenager, I was doing a lot of very, very bad things because I was angry at God and I was walking away from faith in the church and belief. And now here I am, doing this, being a mouthpiece for Jesus and encouraging every one of us to do something with that. Because of these ideas. Because of the ideas that I'm going to tell you in the next couple of weeks. So, if you remember nothing about what I said today, remember this, and you can tell this to anybody. Remember, when you walk away from something, you're walking towards something else. Just remember that, or just test to make sure that the thing you walked away from isn't something made up. If you don't want to believe in the church, or Jesus, or God, or have faith, fine. But make sure it's the real one. Make sure it's a real church. Church of Jesus Christ. A real Church of Jesus Christ. Make sure it's the real God. Make sure it's a real understanding of Jesus. You want to walk away from those things? Fine. I won't be happy about it, but at least I'll be like, you know what? They knew what they were walking away from. I guarantee you most of the people who you deal with, or most of the people here are struggling against gods and faith that's not real. It's made up. It's something you're making up in your head. Sweet. That's all right. You can actually play the song. So instead of singing the final song, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what I just said, and I want you to silently reflect on that as you listen to this song. Because whether this is you or somebody you know, I want you to reflect on what you can do, or what you can think of.
It's telling us it's 50,000.
So are we going to be able to play this?